Alright, this video is going to be a little long, but I need to take care of this. This is going to be a video about Husserl's book, pretty thick book. It's called Experience and Judgment. It's a book that is not as much well known or well read as maybe Cartesian Meditations and the Logical Investigations and the Ideas, or even the Phenomenology of the Consciousness of Internal Time. It's probably not as well read as those. I would also include in that part the Crisis of the European Sciences. But I don't own that. I don't own that book. But I checked it out from the library and I read it in about a week, about that thick. So I took quite a few pages of notes on it. So I gave it back to the library because I don't feel a need to quote from it. But this just the notes I've taken from it. You know what I want to talk about. So I apologize that I don't have the actual book here. If I owned it, I'd probably have it here. But I have the notes that I've taken. Okay, what this book is about. Okay, this is a book that needs to be looked at with respect to early to middle 20th century analytic philosophy, I think maybe a little bit, but mostly with respect to his previous works, or his most well-known works that have to do with phenomenology. This is less so, establishing phenomenological doctrines or tenets. It's not so much about that. In fact, it doesn't really stick to that so much. I mean, it's one needs to read this in light of that stuff, of all the stuff that everyone who reads phenomenology reads. But this needs to be looked at with respect to that, but also with respect to itself. It's a book where what Husserl does. Husserl basically what he does is he looks at the relation between experience and logic. So experience, the word judgment is is a thing that is related to both of those. So it's trying to figure out what the relation between experience and logic is. The main goal, though, is to show that given any experience, there's a presupposition of a certain logic. There's logic undergirding. He doesn't use the word undergirding, but there's a logic, some sort of logic that does undergird, any experience and any judgments that do happen to come from that. So he uses some of those previous phenomenological ideas, like that focus on consciousness, intentionality to an extent, even though he doesn't usually really use that word. Also, he uses the term sense data, which is not a phenomenological term, but it's a term that is used by early 20th century epistemologists like G. Moore and Bertrand Russell, who brought that into this, in that Russell and Wittgenstein primarily led to the Vienna Circle and logical positivism, and that's where a lot of that word was used. That's analytic, but he still uses that term and tries to make use of it. He uses the term intentionality, which is saying that consciousness is consciousness of something. If you want to read on that, there's one of the investigations one of the logical investigations in the logical investigations goes into pretty good deep detail on that. And then there's Noesis Noema and Heile, which I think that's how he pronounces it. Because I never heard anyone say that, but I've just read it before. So when I was taught phenomenology by a man named Imafidi Okamafe, who teaches that in Omaha here, he never gave that term before, but that's something I read somewhere else. Intentionality. It's a realistic idea that consciousness presupposes something being there to be conscious of. That's what it is. He does, think about some of those things. So he brings into use a couple different concepts like attentiveness, obtrusiveness, strangeness, affinity, homogeneity, heterogeneity. Given a certain given a certain subject, there's things we are conscious of, given that doctrine or tenet of intentionality. There's also somewhat of a effect on the other way. Things in the world do have effects on us. That's kind of what is going on here. That's what the terms of obtrusiveness, affinity, and strangeness come into play. So this background world, he makes use of the term an idea of a background world or backdrop. This is the thing presupposed by things we are conscious of. So the word hyla is like feeling and constraining experiences. So this kind of relates to this as to where when I perceive this cup, there's things around it that, I'm not just perceiving the cup. There's a backdrop. There's things around it which, allow that to happen. And there's a pre-predicated consciousness or pre-givenness of things that are there. So what's going to go on here is like a strangeness or an obtrusiveness are things like this. That's what characterizes things from being what I'm immediately focusing on versus other stuff. And he does come to a conclusion about whether logic is we can that experience does presuppose a logic of the sort. And the answer is, I'm going to say right now, yes. We come to terms with this sense data. And he's somewhat Heideggerian in this because he uses those little hyphen words, like Heidegger uses being there, being in the world, or being there with, being as care, in order to, all that stuff that he uses in his work, Being in Time, as well as his other works. What else? There's an act of turning toward. That's a hyphen relation. Turning toward something. So turning toward this cup. Turning my attentiveness towards it. What's being stated here is that there's some things besides that attentiveness that allows for that to happen, presupposes that. Let's see here. And this is somewhat of this concept of attunement in Heidegger and Werner Marx. Some concepts from the phenomenology of the consciousness of internal time come into play here, because things like retention, recollection, primary impression, imminent temporary object, which is kind of the same thing as primal impression, protensions and retentions and all that stuff are discussed here. Then we have this concept that is very prominent, which is called mobilization. And I'm going to come to discuss this more in depth, but it's kind of becoming uncertain of a perception of its being as such and such. So it's becoming uncertain of something being the way it is. It's somewhat of the notion of necessity and possibility, but it's when a perception is modalized, it's becoming uncertain of a certain thing being what it is perceived to be. But that the notion of necessity and possibility is in a more analytic philosophy sense. Um, Active apprehension of an object immediately turns into obstructive contemplation. So he has this little dichotomy here between active apprehension and obstructive contemplation. Apprehension, contemplation. So when I see this, when I see this cub, it's apprehension of it. Following that leads into obstructive contemplation. Apophansis, predicated judgment. It stands at a certain at the center of any kind of formal logic. Apophansis is somewhat related in Heidegger and a little bit Husserl with some terms of certainty a little bit. Something is apophantic, it is, yeah. Apprehension leads to contemplation. That's a conditional relation that if something is apprehended, then it will be, therefore, contemplated. The antecedent of apprehension confirms the consequent of contemplation. And there's the question is that's not really always a good thing, because contemplation can lead to moralization. There's the idea of perception, the sphere of simple apprehension. Perception is a single but multiplicitous immanent temporal unity. That's on page 106. It's, I don't really know how I could explain it any better than that. There's a dichotomy between things active and things passive. That's something that is, in a lot of Husserl's philosophy. There's a book he wrote that I don't have. It's called Active and Passive Genesis, which I would love to buy sometime. I have most of his main works, not the Analytic Husserliana, but I have most of his main works, except for Experience and Judgment and Active and Passive Genesis. But Fantasy and Image Consciousness I have, Consciousness of all the internal time I have, Critique Meditation I have, Logical Investigation I have, Ideas I have, all that stuff. So what is things of affinity? Affinity is contrasted with strangeness. Affinity is somewhat of a, how would I describe that? To not describe it that well would be to say it's familiarity. That's kind of a bad way of characterizing that concept of affinity. There's all these concepts about perception of a certain thing. So there's the intentional, outward, and then there's somewhat of what is developed more here in this volume is there's a lot of things going on of things affecting you this way too. That's why we have terms like obtrusiveness, affinity, attentiveness, strangeness, homogeneity, heterogeneity, all that stuff, and homogeneity and heterogeneity. I will get into. So, what is passivity? Passivity is somewhat related to this backdrop, because, like I had in my in passivity, like we have this little. I don't know if you can see this, but we have the lane of attention going here is to this cat. This X is cat, or no, this Y is cat. The lane of attention is going to this cat, but there's a dog over here. This is a dog. My little stupid ass drawings, but it's the way I understand things. What I need is a big marker board which I'm gonna try and get. My birthday is coming up at the beginning of next month. I'm gonna try and get it, which would make these videos much better, because you wouldn't have to look at my scribbles and drawings that are not very hard. That they're not very easy to see, nor are they that helpful, because they're drawing this on a freaking notebook paper. Anyway, with this subject, with the line of attention on this cat, this dog is still here, but it's in passive. It is passive to the. It's a passive existence to this ego. I put it because it's the ego, because he still calls it the ego here. But then activity is what one is conscious of, attentive of. So this cat is of active existence to the ego. The ego knows object X, the dog is there, when he is in active apprehension of object Y. So he knows that the dog is there. He is not in active apprehension of it. Now, this idea of passivity and activity is discussed with regards to the apprehension of objects. Contemplation will therefore follow based on this little conditional that we have that he has given. In time consciousness, temporal object W is being actually apprehended as long as the sound that he gives it in the PIDC, which I call the phenomenology of internal time consciousness. He says there's a tonal now; it rings out. If we're hearing a melody, then we have these little planes or continua where, let's say I heard a C sharp 5 seconds ago. I still have that in here somewhere. That's a very brief and not cool way of saying it, though, because he says it better and differently. I hope this is adequate for those of you who want to know about this book that Husserl wrote. The temporal object W is being actively apprehended as long as the sound rings out, but it's passively pre-given in passive apprehension, likely of the secondary retention. It's a flowing unity of activity in time consciousness. That's like I can somewhat, bring back the stuff I heard 5 seconds ago. I can bring back that C sharp, even though there is no C sharp in the line or continuum of imminent temporal objects. In page 110 and 111, there's more truth there's more of this than in the PIDC. Husserl's he states the precedence of presence involving retentions and protensions. I wrote a paper about that before. That's what I was talking about. Go on. Obtrusiveness. What is that? It's this is a term that I'm taking from analytic philosopher Lawrence Bonger, epistemologist. I'm taking that to use this. It's what can be called a cognitively spontaneous belief. That's his term, but I'm using it for my purposes to explain Husserl. So he never says that, but cognitively spontaneous belief is never a term he uses. So just block that out of your mind. Let's say I'm not seeing this cup right now. I'm not seeing it at all. Let's say it's really not here right now at all. But then somehow, boom, there it is. but I'm not really ready for it by any means. It's something that makes its appearance spontaneously and almost rudely, I would say. Um, just becomes there. It obtrudes into our lane of attentiveness. So this is also used with the term of strangeness because there's no affinity here. There's no, I know this going on. There's none of that. Okay, so that's the term of obtrusiveness and strangeness. So all these terms I'm hopefully giving good enough, and if I'm not, tell me below. Apprehension. It will mean that there will be contemplation. Affinity and familiarity of what is contemplated. So then we have this idea of experiencing something as a whole is to mean that you're experiencing its internal determinations. Husserl doesn't give this, but I give this little function here. The whole thing is the function of S, but its internal determinations is the alpha and the beta, and there could be infinitely more. That's kind of the way I understand that, because you understand the whole thing as S, the function of S. But to understand the thing in its whole is to understand that it's, according to Husserl, its internal determinations. So in the apprehension of S, we cannot apprehend its internal determinations, and by that of alpha and beta, and by that we come to know S. So you can't know the whole thing without knowing and experiencing its internal determinations of the alpha and beta. So this is the process of developing contemplation, is to know something as a whole, is to know its alpha and beta, its internal determinations. So in apprehension and more primarily contemplation, whether it's affinity and familiarity, there's what is called a polythetic unity, according to him, where there's not a monothetic unity would be to be only in understanding and contemplation with only one certain thing. So I think under here is stating some sort of a atomism, where things can be broken down to, certain internal determinations, to where there are minimal things that we can know. There's things within the world that we can't break down any further, and if we know those smaller things, then we can build up towards knowing the wholes. In a monothetic unity, I think would be to understand just one of those atoms, one of those alphas or betas, those internal determinations, I would say. A polythetic unity would be to understand all of those. Would be the ego in contemplation of all those things, and thus the whole. Or the unity of articulated contemplation. Knowing the function S and alpha and beta is to, I was wondering, is it the idea of kennen oder wissen in German? I would think wissen, though. I don't know why I was thinking this back when I wrote it as a little note I made. So contemplation is a twofold constitution of sense. The object as substrate and object as determination. So the substrate is the whole thing, looking at it from the whole, and then the determinations are as such. So are these logical categories of experiencing all these things? Yeah, I think it is. So I think this can be likened somewhat. The dog's laying on his back. The Dexter. He's out like a light. Okay. These could be what he's doing is logical categories of experiencing the world. We could experience the world in these internal determinations, or they could be, looking at it from the whole substrate, looking at it as they are as a whole. So this apprehension, understanding it, from its substrate, to contemplation, understanding it from its internals, and to know it entirely with affinity and familiarity. These seem to be logical categories of experiencing things. So, it's somewhat likened to what I think anyway, Bertrand Russell's philosophy of logical atomism, where there's this metaphysics of logical atoms, basically. I do have a video on that, which I think this is similar, but not the same as that. Partial apprehension, there can be that where things in the substrate are over-apprehended, while then there's the absolute substrate, which is a concept which is where everything is connected together. Dex, wake up! Jeez. There's the absolute and a finite substrate. The finite substrate can be experienced in and of itself, but it is a part of a comprehensive plurality. So it's a multiplicity of logical categories. So we have the absolute substrate where all the substrates are interconnected, and furthermore, this can break down into there's absolute finite, and there's some it breaks down into determinations, I would say. So these are, I think, logical categories of our experience of the world, and when we make judgments about them, things also do apply to this. So this is looked at as a totality of existence, not existence with a C, but existence, of all the existence. This book is almost, well, I think it is really ontological, but the focus is really experience, and how are we going to break that down logically and understand it and figure out if there is some kind of logic presupposed by our experience. Everything finite is and depends upon the world being independent. The absolute substrate is the totality of nature, of our experience, but by this ego is only a certain part of it. So, like, if you read G.E. Moore's intro of sense data, he puts a envelope for people and say how many envelopes are we seeing, and can the envelope each of you saw be applied to this material object. So I have a video, few videos about that too. But I think this is an idea about how, given every object, not everything can be ultimately experienced of it. So then we kind of broaden, the more he writes here, we further broaden this logical ontology, I guess. this. So he states that experience is a logical activity. Absolute substrates breaking down into original or finite substrates, dependent moments and relations. So we have this big, huge ontology of experiencing things, because we have absolute substrate upon absolute substrate, but it can break down into more finite ones, and we can understand the relations between all these things, and understand their internal determinations and all this stuff. So there's this huge logical ontology that is in this book, which I think is just beautiful and awesome. And if you can get your hands on this book and you love Husserl's works, and this is definitely one you have to get your hands on, because not only is it like a phenomenological metaphysics, but I think it's more of a logical ontology, which is more likened to Heidegger than any kind of rationalistic or even contemporary analytic metaphysics. So, what time is it? Oh, 8:43. Okay. No, that is it. I thought I had more. No, that is pretty much it. So then, what can we conclude from that? From all that stuff, this logical ontology that he gives, what can be really concluded? Is it, and I personally think that he makes his case. He gives all this stuff and he shows all of it. By the way, heterogeneity in experience, not everything blends together. There is obtrusivenesses. there is obtrusiveness. There's all this stuff that doesn't all blend in together, where things don't as much blend into this backdrop. Homogeneity is where everything does. Everything does kind of do this one thing, in this one huge backdrop where things blend in together. And from that, if something does become obtrusive or strange, we can know that because of the difference of this one thing between the rest of things in a homogeneity. So, do you think that he has really made his point, his conclusion? And honestly, I think he does, because he kind of gives this logical ontology of what happens when we experience something, and he also has a little thing about making judgments towards the end of this book, which I didn't really go into too much detail of, but he kind of gives a idea about what happens when something is judged, or what occurs when a ego makes a judgment. And judgment is itself a logical activity also, because a certain assertion is made about given all these things. So, honestly, if you like this stuff, then this is definitely beautiful, beautiful, awesome stuff. If you like Husserlian phenomenology, I think it really does show, though, that any experience we have, any consciousness that we really have, presupposes that there's some logic going on. There's what Russell might call a logical atomism going on here. There is, if you take logic, you do all these things with various connectives, the negation, the conjunction, the disjunction, the conditional and biconditional, you do all these things with these different connectives, and it's understanding not only language, but the way we experience things, and we kind of can understand the basic ideas about those things. And I think that he has really proved that here. So yeah, if you have any opinion on this, I'd be glad to discuss it with you. And if I, again, the reason I do these videos is for the purpose of, um, for the purpose of, you know, halfway the purpose of, you know, me getting some, you know, knowledge. If I understand something wrong, or if I misconstrue something, then someone can tell me, you know, and if what they're saying is right, then I don't then I don't I don't care if it's rude or whatever. I'm glad I got it. So if there's any of you that have read this who got something different, do let me know.